Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate.
It is I.
And we are also joined tonight by Rachel Fulton Brown, professor and author and collaborating author, among other things, of Aurora Borealis. Do I have that? Did I get that right?
Yes, bears. I'm happy to be here.
Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about that project quickly?
Yes, certainly. So the collaboration is with the Dragon Common Room, which is the online fencing Saul monastic school and poetry writing workshop that I started a few years ago. We've done, well, we're on our third poem now called Draco Alchemicus, which is about a sinister dragon who has captured the world. But with the Aurora Borealis, that one's, well, there's sinister characters in Aurora Borealis, but it's for kids. And it's basically a grail quest that the bears go in search of the light and have to rescue a panda from the evil seals. They discover some penguins in an ice city who have mysteries that they are, caring for, and the bears have to both persuade the penguins to enrich themselves spiritually and rescue the panda again. It's a adventure for kids in finding the light.
Okay, so
and you can buy it. Although so it's also fully illustrated, and our artist, when we originally did the book, was titling herself Hand Drawn Bear. She has since unveiled and is publishing under her own name as Kathleen Coggins. So we are in a reprint right now that we're putting her proper name on the books and such. So you can buy the hardcover when we get that one re-released next week, probably. And the ebook is still out under Hand Drawn Bear if you want a vintage edition.
So are there print copies with the first name, with the pseudonym, or
the print? Yeah. So we published it about 1.5 years ago, and so everyone who's bought it in the first 1.5 years will have it with the Hand Drawn Bear. But she's actually got her own series of children's books, and she wanted to be publishing those under her own name, so we need to change her name on our book too.
So if you have one of the first set that have the previous name, that might someday be a collector's item.
We sure hope so. Yeah, the vintage OG Hand Drawn Bear versions are going to be really valuable once we become really famous, and everybody wants to know about Ulfie and the bears, for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, once you're a popular children's author as Matt Walsh, y'all are going to be.
Hey, we're aiming for animated, fame, because Colleen, our Hand Drawn Bear under her true name, has actually worked as an animator. So the pictures in Aurora Borealis it's like they're stills, obviously, because it's the book, but you can see the animation wanting to burst forth. It's going to happen. We're sure of it. And then then everyone who has a Hand Drawn Bear copy will, be happy that they got on board early on.
Okay, so I just realized I should have said this part before I asked about your book, because we are getting together. Tell people what we're talking about tonight, and we are getting together tonight to discuss the G.K. Chesterton poem, "The Donkey." Before we get to that, I did want to mention also, if you like my channel, if you like my work, if you'd like to help me keep going, I do have, you can support me through subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great, and the link will be in the show description. And having said that, Rachel has kindly volunteered to read the poem for us tonight. So let me get that up on the screen, and we will do that. I need to close some of these windows because my computer is just slightly lagging here, and I'm a little worried I'm going to run into real problems. Anyway,
everybody got tired of hearing me after all those talks about Horatius.
Yes, we
That's
So
a
yeah,
long
we just.
time.
Oh, come on, what's going on here? Did I get it?
Yeah, we just spent like 4 to 6 months talking about Horatius at the bridge.
Are you familiar with that one, by the way, Rachel?
I mean, I know the story, but no, I don't know the poem.
Oh, okay. You should look it up. It's Horatius at the Bridge by Thomas Babington, Lord Macaulay, and has one of the best martial speeches in English literature, in my opinion. It is right up there with the St. Crispin's Day speech. So,
But you spent 6 months talking about the one. But is it a long poem? Is it a epic?
it's 600 lines long.
Okay.
So, I mean, not epic, but when I recorded it, because I try and do this on try and put these out every 2 weeks, I split it into sections so I could keep the schedule. Because while I memorized them and then perform them, I could not memorize 600 lines in 2 weeks. I'm not that good. So I split it up for the recording purposes, and then we discussed it in slightly larger chunks than I recorded it in. So
Okay.
but yeah,
In pieces. Yes. Well, that one's not one I know.
You should look it up anyway, or you could if you have a half an hour to listen. You could just listen to my YouTube video where I finally edited all of my pieces together. I like to think I did a good job. Okay. Having said all of that, is the donkey up on the screen?
Yes.
No, just some text.
It's shorter.
That too.
Yeah. And I well, it's I think I have it on a page here that I'll read from. Okay, so I do not memorize these, so you just get me reading. The Donkey by G.K. Chesterton. When fishes flew and forests walked and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody on all four-footed things. The tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will, starve, scourge, deride me, I am dumb. I keep my secret still. Fools! For I also had my hour, one far, fierce hour and sweet. There was a shout about my ears, palms before my feet.
So, oh, here we go.
Now you have donkey. No, that's not donkey. That's cooking.
What did I? Oh, that was a different thing.
Recipe ideas.
Actually, that's not what I was trying to find, and I didn't mean that to show up. So, but it doesn't matter. It's off the screen now. And it's not a what's his name? I'm trying to remember. There was some newscaster who was screen sharing and had like tabs open to things that you don't.
You shouldn't have ever tabbed in the first place, right?
That
it's like,
too.
Never mind, like make sure to clear your browser. Just don't have it in your browser history in the first place.
Well, yes, that too. But anyway, I was trying to look up something else, which once I find it, I will because there's another story that was relevant to this that one part of this reminded me of. I don't know whether Chesterton did that on purpose. But Nate, would you like to start us off with your thoughts on the poem?
I read this poem and I think it's literally me. Like, okay. Yeah, because I mean it's, I got the wings. I'm kind of ornery, pretty ornery. And yet somehow, despite I was born hours before Halloween began. So, we line up on something. But still somehow, Christ sees fit to make use of me, to carry his gospel. And so in a way, me and this donkey are kin in that. It's I'm not much, but the Savior wants me to do something for him, so I'll have my hour doing that.
How about you, Rachel? What were your first thoughts when you read this?
Well, now Nate's saying that he's the donkey. So that I was born in Missouri, so my mother always said I was stubborn, like a mule, though, like not like a donkey, right? but maybe I subconsciously had that sympathy for the donkey. So I was talking about Aurora Borealis and our artist Colleen, and she's done two absolutely lovely children's poems. One called the King's Colt, and one, The Donkey Who Carried the Ark. And both of them are obviously about the donkeys. One that carried Mary, in the medieval images, it's into the flight into Egypt, but in Colleen's story, they go to Bethlehem and then onward. And then in the King's Colt, of course, it's the donkey who's carrying him on Palm Sunday. And in both instances, she has the donkey witnessed to the mysteries, and it's just incredibly touching. And so when I read Chesterton, you asked me, it's like, which should we read, right? And it's like a Chesterton, and there's this, humility of seeing what was it like for the donkey having the palms fall at his feet. I'm not sure I see he's saying, fools, I had my hour. But I find it very sweet, yes, I'm influenced by Nate's reading, that we in fact end up being there in the moment. I don't see it as a donkey, though. I see it as myself as a donkey. I see it as all of those creatures who the world derides and belittles, and we misread them.
Well, and now I'm looking up another scripture because that reminded me of where this was. I really liked this one. I stumbled across this when I was in high school. Let me see. There it is. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26. Very much to the purpose. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. And, it's, fits with this poem and, the general ideas, so far, God said, so no one gets the impression that this is about them. I'm going to choose the unlikeliest possible candidates to make this happen, so everyone knows it is and always was about me.
Mm.
But
It reminds me of a point I ran across doing a men's Sunday school group. I did a series, and the last thing I did was talking about, everything that is for the glory of God. And so, this idea that sometimes we don't even see it. We're used, and we contribute to the purposes of God on earth without even knowing. Kind of like this donkey. He thinks that all the adulation was for him, like that little dog that wandered down the coronation aisle in front of the king. It's like, man, these people think I'm a really good dog. In the same way, we can sort of inherit for a moment the glory of God, and the more we serve, the more we're transformed by it. And 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." And so, yeah, the more, and that's kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, the more that we allow Christ to shine in our lives, that it rubs off on us. And that's the only way to find any sort of, that's the only way to make that far off, wild, sweet hour last, is to, continue to be the servant, carry the king into town.
Well, and kind of on a related note, there's thinking of J.R.R. Tolkien and the way he talks about creativity and like human imagination, and he said his I believe it's a term from him. He calls what we do subcreation. God is the creator, and he wants us to take part in that, but at the same time, everything we do is going to be a if we do right with it, it's going to be a reflection of his own creative work, and he wants us to do that. But at the same time, we should also remember where we are, that he is the creator, and we are taking part in that and reflecting his glory, and that should be the purpose of creative work.
So this is all of this fits certainly with truth, but it wasn't what I read when I read the poem. So I'm trying to recover what it was that I. No, it's interesting because no, Nate, it's like you made me think about myself as donkey, and I don't want to do that. I wasn't. Not because I don't like the donkey, but more because I do like the donkey, and there's this sort of sweetness for me in seeing the sort of this character that the world tends to make fun of. And so I would say, like, I spent the last weekend watching the Shrek movies, which has a donkey. And I love that. I love the donkey in Shrek. One, because I kept making jokes off of, I was trying to explain a few weeks ago, writing some posts on my blog about our poetry work. And one of the things we're trying to do with the Dragon Common Room and with our poems is work on the layers of meaning that are carried in scripture, and which we're hoping, like Dante, we say our poems are carrying, so that there's a literal level, there's a allegorical level, there's a moral level, and there's a contemplative level, anagogical last things. But I think of it like you're lifting yourself up in transcendence, and that great poetry, which, okay, we're donkeys in the moment and writing our own poems. Aurora Borealis is still like donkey verse for sure. Now maybe we get a little bit, but it's like that our poems are taking on the story level, the Christological significance, the moral truths that we hope people get from reading them, and then hopefully at that lifting up, that moment when you, as Tolkien talks about, that the veil is rent and you see reality peeking through in the story. And that's, for most people, I've lost you already, right? I'm not talking about layers and there are 4 of them, and it's like, oh, well, they're like ogres, right? It's like when Shrek is trying to explain to the donkey how he's misunderstanding them, and he's like, well, ogres are like onions. They have, round and stinky. No, they have layers, and the donkey is there obviously to, remind you of the sort of whimsy of what the story is trying to show you. And that, for me, in Chesterton's poem, that's what the donkey does, right? He's this comic element that is constantly there underneath the gospel story, that has the transcendent breaking through. And that's what the palms at his feet is, at that moment when the ridiculous and the impossible and the everyday breaks through into that magnificence and glory, like ogres with layers, right? And so, as Eddie Murphy is voicing the donkey, that the donkey keeps doing that. He's always there as the reminder of the friendship that he has for Shrek, of Shrek either pushing. Well, there's in the movies, there's that silliness of the dragon falling in love with the donkey. So obviously dragon metaphor meditations for me, but that donkey is there as this possibility always of the joyous and the mischievous and the humorous. And since Chesterton is all about that laughter of creation, that's more what I saw in this donkey poem, that he's there and ridiculous, but in that one moment he also is in that glory.
So one interesting thing I found in this poem is how I don't know. Okay, I know one. I'm certain one of these was intentional. I'm not sure about the other one, but how, to me at least, he makes references to like several other parts of the Bible, and if you're not very super familiar with it already, or if you're not looking for them, you're pretty likely to miss this. So obviously the last stanza is Palm Sunday, John chapter 12, Matthew chapter 21, but then also when fishes flew and forests walked and figs grew upon thorn, which that is actually from one of Jesus's messages. When he's talking about by your fruits you will know them. By what the results of people's actions are, you will know how to judge them. Do figs grow upon thistles? And I should have had that reference copied out already. I would guess it's in Matthew chapter 7, but I don't have it right now. But and then also the other thing, the third stanza, starve, scourge, deride me, I am dumb, I keep my secret still. In this context, in British English, dumb more commonly means mute, not stupid. The donkey is mute, he's not going to talk. But there's also another story in the Bible where the donkey does start talking, which is
yeah, Balaam's ass. I mean, in addition to being the tattered outlaw of the earth who carries Messiah, he's also the idiot beast of burden who tells off the shaman. The pagan wise man is like, I'm trying to save your life, jackwagon. Why don't you quit whacking me, huh? Angel is right there and he's going to kill you. So I'm sitting here so you don't die. Thanks for the corn. And I'm like, just the donkey, man. He's a very interesting character. He's been through a lot.
Well, so what do you make of the second? You skipped over the second stanza though, saying that he's the devil's parody, which then tends to go against the sense that he's one of God's creatures. If he's the devil's parody, that seems a bit strange.
I mean, he has his own thoughts about himself. The first two stanzas of this is like his self-introduction, and the donkey talks about himself like his coming was foretold in evil prophecy. Just, he's like, I am not a good creature. I'm really not. He's like, all the bad things you say about me are probably true. And so, honestly, that's what got me the kinship with the donkey. Because I'm like, yeah, just about any criticism somebody could level at me, I'd probably just nod along and be like, yeah, most of the time. But, and so I love his self-description. And yeah, I mean, the devil's walking parody. I mean, donkeys are mean, man. Like, I have seen donkeys doing their thing, and there just always seems to be spite in it.
Well, and then also, like, if you hadn't seen one before, but like you were familiar with horses, and then you saw a donkey, it does kind of seem like it was like, okay, so someone was trying to make a horse, and it didn't quite come out right. Like, it does seem like a thing you might say if again, you knew horses, and then you saw this other thing. It's like, that should have been a horse, but it's not quite.
They put too much baking powder in that one. It just didn't rise. It's like it's like the short body, kind of funky proportion legs, big old head, and all of that head is full of meanness. Just, the ears are all over the place, like he says. Yeah, they're just. I mean, it's to the point that jackrabbits are so named because their ears are so wildly disproportionate, like those of a jackass. They're literally called jackass rabbits because they're so gangly and weird looking, and also a little crazy. So it's like, okay, yeah, that I can understand why he'd call himself the devil's parody, because God makes beautiful things and elegant things, and then the devil comes along and slaps together some mismatched 2x4s and molding, and then sticks a couple of feather dusters on top and is like, get at it, go wreck this place. An orc horse.
An orc horse. Yeah. That still sort of goes against us. Like he is one of God's creatures, so why would Chesterton call him a devil? Devilish parody. The devil's walking parody on all four-footed things. I'm also sort of the fishes flew in forest walk. Of course, those are fish don't fly. Maybe they the flying fish jump up, right? Forests don't walk. Although you end up with either Ents or Macbeth, right? Which I thought was a little bit strange. And the moon was blood. Zach, do you have a prophecy that's not biblical, is it? The blood moon? All of these things sound like they're coming out of, other folklore traditions.
That actually, maybe I'm just here. Let me see. Maybe I'm just imagining it, but that actually does a little bit kind of sound kind of like something from Revelation.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, that definitely comes about in Revelation. It's mentioned as such.
Which would then make
Honestly,
time topsy-turvy in this if he's actually playing with that. So I started looking up one. I was thinking of Shrek and I was thinking of the donkeys there, and then I looked up what they have in the bestiaries about donkeys, although they're not called donkeys, they're asinum, asses. And you have Barlam's ass, and you have the way that in the Pseudo-Matthew description in the Nativity, you quote Isaiah, which is why, in fact, we have the ox and the ass in all of the Nativity scenes, because of that tradition of saying that what the ox and the ass know their master, but not human beings. So a criticism on both the Gentiles and the Jews, the Gentiles and the Jews who recognize the donkeys. Or I forgot. I should have looked. You guys do scripture citation better than I do. I remember all the associations and then have to reference them again. That those are the two that the bestiaries tend to reference, and then of course the flight into Egypt and the Palm Sunday. But none of these things, none of the moon blood or the ugliness of the donkeys come into even the medieval bestiary descriptions of them.
Okay, I found this the moon to blood, and it is 3 places in the Bible, although one of them is directly quoting another. And so Joel chapter 2, verse 31, the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then that is quoted in Acts, and then also Revelation chapter 6. I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red. So here, wait. Now go back to where we started. Some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. I
it's a
am
prophecy. It's a
presaging
prophecy
the
of
end
the
of
end.
the end of the world.
Well, also, I mean, it could just be playing around with the idea of, nature being unspooled for a moment when such an oddball creature was done. I mean, it doesn't have to be a specifically, this is an absolutely scriptural reference. I mean, again, the donkey clearly sees himself as a character that's not quite on the right side. And so I think it's just about, it's like, I'm very strange and a little not right. And so for something like me to have been created, then things had to have been all kinds of weird. Like there was strangeness afoot when my kind came around.
Right, but I think Chesterton. So I found it's the Isaiah. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel hath not known me, and my people hath not understood. So in that context, the ox and the ass know who their master is, and Israel doesn't. And so the ass is actually a, rebuke to Israel's wandering. Which
Congratulations, guys! You're stupider than a donkey.
Right. So, well, yeah. Yes. And it's from that reference to the ass that we end up with the ox and the ass in the nativity scene. So every time you've done a little nativity play and you've got the donkey and the cow, it's because of that, saying these animals recognize their master, but Israel can't.
Well, I mean, also in actual, in nature sciences, there are only a few animals that'll actually you can get them to work themselves to death. You can work a horse to death. You can work a dog to death. Occasionally, you can work a cow to death, and they'll do it more or less willingly. They'll do it because they want to please you. A donkey will not do that.
Mm.
And that's where they get the idea of being ornery, is that a donkey starts to go, hey, you know what? This is starting to wear me out. I'm getting tired. I'm getting a little sore. I'm done. Day's over, boys. Got to go home and rest. And so you can argue that the donkey actually has an extra layer of wisdom to be able to do that kind of self-preservation, even when, he's domestic. He's like, yeah, look, master, I see where you're coming from. There's more field out there that you want done, or you want to haul this a little further. I get all that, but I ain't doing it. We'll come back tomorrow and I'll work just fine. But for now, I'm tired. I'll have me a rest. And so, like I said, that's a lot. I mean, and that's so where part of the whole thing is donkeys are stubborn, is because, yeah, they don't like what's happening. They're just not going to be a part of it.
Which is, inconvenient for the master at the moment. But, in certain circumstances, that's a very good character trait to have. Yeah, I'm not going along with this anymore. There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of things recently where, things would have got a lot smoother if more people had said at some point, no, I'm done. Not working, not cooperating with this any longer. So stubborn, yeah, and still alive is a nice thing too.
Yes, that works. I was thinking something else, donkey like. Oh yes, we have no idea what the word means. So because we in my poetry group, we spend a lot of time picking words in the poems that we're writing, and then you get in the habit of looking it up and making sure that you know exactly what the word means. And then I'm reading right now Henry Hitchens' history. Now I've forgotten what the title is. It's a history of words in English, and so I was like, oh, wait, donkey. Where does that come from? It's like, do you have any idea how old the word is?
It seems like it would be one of the ones that goes back pretty long.
Apparently not. Apparently it's 18th century. Yeah, that it's like 1785 it becomes the word for donkey, which means prior to that, well, what was the animal called? And you know, in Latin it's assinum, so I guess it's asses, but before donkey it was cuddy, which is witnessed in the 18th century, a jade, which is referenced in 1600, and neddy, 1545. So in fact there were no donkeys until the 18th century. Or at least according to our written record. After 1806, it's called a Jerusalem pony. There's an 1858 version of it, thistle eater, a donkey. And 1916, a donk. But apparently the Oxford English Dictionary doesn't know where the word comes from. It just appears in the 18th century, which is pretty late considering all of the, it's like, the English has been a poetic and mischievous, and you know, donkey could rhyme with lots of stuff, sort of useful word. It's apparently a new word, which startled me. Yeah, I thought it would be an old word too, and that ass would be the Latin. I guess ass is the Latinate one, which is funny because now we think of ass as the more embarrassing term to use for a donkey. And a donkey, it seems like the, you know, the OED people are guessing and saying, oh, it must have been maybe a name like a donk, and there was a slur on it or something, that it was a, you know, like you're such a so and so. But yeah, so that was a dead end. I thought I'd find more from the history of the word.
So it's sort of ascended slang.
Yeah, probably from somewhere in the 18th century.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
But before that, it would be a neddy or a jade or a cuddy, which, I mean, don't have the same resonance as donkey. Donkey clearly sounds silly, and like it sounds like what the donkey sounds make. Donkey, right? But that's it's not the older name for the animal.
It's so I'm also looking at the story of Palm Sunday here, and I've never made a formal study of this. I'm just kind of relying on things I heard in, you know, sermons or reading, you know, different books. But like, you know, Palm Sunday, a week before, you know, his betrayal and crucifixion, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and you know, the crowds come out and praise him, and you know, throw palms on the road as a sign of welcome, which, you know, among other things, among other lessons Christians should take from this, by the way, don't trust the mob. Don't trust the opinion of the crowds. They will, you know, be praising you 1 minute and calling for your death, you know, 5 minutes later. But relevant to this also, you know, Jesus deliberately sends his disciples. He's like, go to this place. There's going to be a donkey there. I want you to bring it to me. Which, you know, among other things, like, it's never spelled out. Was this some sort of, you know, prophetic instinct, or had Jesus like made arrangements for this first with the owner of the donkey that, like, anyway,
right?
That wasn't where I was going.
How is the donkey available to be there to be ridden into town for sure?
But anyway,
if the owner of the donkey asks you what the heck you're doing taking his donkey, just tell him, you know, the king needs it.
Yeah, but it's like both. They take a donkey and her colt, right? So it's
yes.
Somehow the pictures never show both of them. I think this is sad. They should have the mom and the donkey.
What I'm reading here, it says untie them and bring them to me. Yes. So if that's a correct translation, they're bringing both. I don't know why, but anyway.
Right, but the pictures never show both. I think they should have both.
but if the one thing I heard about this is correct, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and that's actually a kind of symbolic choice, because when a king would visit a town, if the king rode in on a donkey, it was a sign that he was there, in peace and in good, and and offering goodwill. Whereas if he came on a horse, that would be it's more likely that you're going to have problems. And so, Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey is saying, I am here. If you, well, and the scripture says, "See, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey,"
right?
Which that also fits that general idea. The king comes gentle and riding on a donkey, and those two ideas are part of the same thing, which is also how Hebrew poetry tends to work, repeating the same sentiment in different forms. But
yeah, that's Zacharias 9:9, which I was realizing I should have. If we were going to we cite scripture in this. Okay, so I can do that. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion! Shout for joy, O daughter of Jerusalem! Behold, thy king will come to thee, the just and Savior. He is poor and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass.
That is your king is going to come. He is poor. That's an interesting combination there. Now,
well, and in the context of all of this, it's so this is Zacharias, right? War, war, war. He'll come in peace. War, war, war. Right. That the ass is definitely not a war horse, I think, is the premise there. So I'm curious about, it's like the asinum can mean, and this is what was in the definitions, right? A jade, a contemptuous name for a horse of inferior breed, a cart or draft horse as opposed to riding horse, a roadster, hack. In the bestiary pictures of the what we're calling a donkey, the asses, I mean, they're not necessarily tiny, although usually in the drawings Jesus is shown riding what looks like a smaller animal, but war horses sometimes don't look that big either in the pictures. So I'm not sure how big of an animal they're imagining. I'm always thinking donkeys like you see in Greece now with the old grandmas, carrying the donkey. The donkeys have all the sticks and stuff on them, and they're little animals, like in Shrek, right? He's a dog, like a dog character in Shrek. But is this ass that Jesus rides, is it just not a war horse, or is it a tiny comical animal?
A donkey generally will be a few hundred pounds, whereas a horse will generally be 1,000 or upwards. So a horse is what
we call donkeys now. That's
animal.
what I'm saying. We don't have the word donkey until 18th century. So what is it the scriptures are actually imagining? The asinum is.
I mean, I don't think they've changed that much.
Well, that's a problem for our imagining, right? Chesterton's clearly imagining what we think of as these little several 100-pound animals, not a mule or something, right? That
not a funky looking horse.
Right.
Well, it's if I based on trends with other animals, other domesticated animals, I would guess, if anything, I would guess our horses are probably are quite likely larger than the horses of they had in Jesus's day. I don't know if the same kind of change would be with donkeys, because we don't do the same kind of things with them, for the very reasons that we have horses to do those things that require big impressive feats. And so it doesn't seem like donkeys would have been changed in the same way.
But so some of my point is pointing up that the word is new. Donkey is new. It's a comical word. Asinum, ass is not. It's like the more we talk about donkeys, which is what Chesterton did in the poem, right? He calls it the donkey, not the ass. He makes it comical. He makes it silly. A lot of that's playing off of the sound in English, donkey, donkey. Which you don't get in Latin, asinum, right? It's a different animal, but it's not a war horse, right?
But they did. I mean, they also did still have the comical or silly, Well, okay. Again, back in scriptural times, it's harder to say, but like, if you go back to say Shakespeare, when the fairies play a trick on Bottom, was that him?
Mm-hmm.
Midsummer Night's Dream. When the fairies play a trick on him, and want to make him silly, they don't give him a horse's head, they give him an ass's head.
Right, but it's not a donkey's head because Shakespeare doesn't use the word.
That bothers me now. I didn't know that. And
See, that's why I thought the word would be older, and then to find out it's new. So Shakespeare couldn't have used it. Bottom has an ass's head, which is a joke on bottom, I suppose.
Well, then there's the question of, did that word refer to people's rear end at the time? And I don't know about that part.
Does it ass mean bottom because of Shakespeare? Yes, that could be. Right. So the problem is like Chesterton's playing off the modern understanding of the animal, but I tried looking up a little bit on things like Ludolf of Saxony's version in the Life of Christ, and he just has various allegorical layers of who are throwing palms before the feet of the ass and things like that, and it's different ways of preparing for the apostles and the martyrs, and said there's no comedy in it at all.
It doesn't necessarily. Well, yeah, like I don't think there's necessarily comedy in Palm Sunday, but there is like we said gentle. You can come to you gentle and riding a donkey. There's
right.
The not threatening, and comic and not threatening are not the same thing, but they're related. Something you're going to laugh at is not something that's scaring you. But
this is where I think I'm going to disentangle all of this, because I was very sad to find donkey's not a new word, is a new word, that Chesterton is playing off the joy and the comedy of the ridiculous being transcendent, but that's not necessarily available. It's certainly not available for the word becomes comical, and it's not necessary. It doesn't seem to me that that's necessarily why Jesus has the animal that he did, which we started with as the premise, right? God using the ridiculous to elevate, but we're done. We're stumped.
Nate, how about you? You haven't
made ridiculous by etymology.
Well, the ass has made an ass of us. It's all right though. But honestly, in the end, whether it's a low quality horse or an actual burro, I don't think it really matters. It shows that it makes the point that needed to be made, which is that sometimes it's the base materials that can create the finest masterpiece. Sometimes it is just the salt of the earth that creates the best meal. Sometimes it's the goofiest creature imaginable that is going to bear the glorious entrance of Messiah to his kingdom. And so, again, new word, old word, horse, actual, donkey. Doesn't really matter.
But it does
it's
actually.
an interesting.
I can make it
interesting thought, but it doesn't change the meaning in my mind.
Okay, so here's the serious and sad part of all of that. I've been in numerous, including with one of the people that was an author on Aurora Borealis, who is not working with us on the new poem, but we had regular and sometimes, unfortunately, quite saddening conversations about the Chestertonian motto that Milo and I had been using, the Risus et Bellum, right, laughter in war, which came from one of Chesterton's meditations in Orthodoxy, or was it in Heretics? Thinking about the looking at the Salvation Army and they're singing and saying, it's like this was this glad and angry faith, right? This was the war. We go into war joyously and triumphantly, even though we're ridiculous, right? So here we're doing Chesterton's poem, we're doing the donkey, and we've got the joy and the ridiculous, and Chesterton giving us that. And our friend that was on the bear poem kept saying, God doesn't like that. We're laughing at God. I mean, to say this, that this friend was Orthodox, a convert to Orthodoxy, not Catholicism, and therefore not sympathetic to Chestertonian wit and whimsy at all. But from his perspective, laughter is chimpanzees howling over their kill. It has nothing to do with what the joy of our salvation.
That person is wrong.
Right, but this was, it was such a bitter and difficult conversation that we ended up with not being able to work together anymore, because he was so insistent that the joy that we were trying to put into, for example, Aurora Borealis, there's some slapstick in it. The opening scene has Abner the albatross showing up and talking to Ulfilas, who's sitting there looking at the northern lights and saying, there's lights down south, and he has to taunt Ulfi to get up off his ice floe and go on this adventure. And our friend was saying that has nothing to, God doesn't take jokes. There's nothing, jokes and whimsy have nothing to do with the sacred.
Well, I think that kind of attitude has us misreading things a lot in the Bible. Like, what was there's a part of I want to say it's in Matthew chapter 6. I'd have to double check, but there's this thing that people refer to all the time. Don't what is it? You try and pick a speck out of your brother's eye while you have a log in your own eye. And it's like there's this kind of solemnness and very serious approach that we tend to do with this because it's the Bible and it's Jesus.
Red letters.
I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be he was making a serious point. Yes, I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be a joke. Oh, hey, you've got a bit of sawdust in your eye. Meanwhile, he's got a plank of wood coming out of his that. How can that not have been intended as a joke? And we miss things like that when we try to make everything holy has to be serious and solemn, and I don't think that's right either. And there's a number of places where Jesus says something where I think if you read it not just as holy text but humanly, a human person talking, he was human just like us, not just human, but he was. If you read it just in a human fashion, it's like, yes, I think he was making jokes sometimes. So,
well, so this is also come into our writing of our Draco Chemicus, because one of the characters is a Christ figure, and we are, I think we've sorted this out. But if you've ever tried to write an actual Christ figure, not just a Christian figure who is a saint. I mean, saints are hard to write too, I think, but saints are imitating Christ. Christ himself, I think the movies and such have all dealt with this in different ways. It's like, if you're portraying Christ, how human do you make him? How, fallible? Well, he can't be fallible. He's Jesus, right? And this level of, so is he sending them to get a ass in her cult because it's funny? It seems unlikely, right? If you said it, it's like Chesterton can make it funny, and here's the donkey with his giant ears, and he's silly, and he's hee-hawing and everything, but I'm not sure Jesus meant it to be funny when he rode in through the gate and had the palms there.
Well, no, I mean, there was symbolism in that. And also it was to fulfill prophecy, it was foretold that he would do this. It has these meaning. But at the same time, yeah, it's kind of funny.
Now I've convinced myself, no, it can't possibly, there's no way that, people throwing the palms at their feet would have been I mean, a man riding a donkey is going to be ridiculous.
At least a little bit.
Maybe he was just broke at the moment and he couldn't afford to get a horse.
No, well, I think he's fulfilling the prophecy. But
yeah, it's prophecy. And like I said, if you look at it from, the top down, who is this man on this donkey and why is he here? It gets a lot more solemn and a lot, it really restores a lot of the gravity. But when you're looking at it from the donkey's eye view, you're swiveling your big floppy ears around and going, boy, these people sure are excited to see me. Yeah, that's where the funny happens.
It also, I didn't think of this until we were midway through this discussion, but this whole thing, at some point, this reminded me a little bit of Saint Francis, and how he described how a Christian should regard the body.
Yeah, it's his ass, the brother ass.
And it's like, brother, it's, not above or below, but, soul and body are, both are brother ass. Kind of stupid, kind of self-willed, doesn't always want to cooperate, but, he's, it's a part of me just the same. And I'm a Christian again, God and man, and in that sense, Jesus also came to us riding brother ass. Jesus came to us, with in a body, and with all of the ridiculousness that came along with that. And I actually remember, it's been a long time. I'd have to look this up, and I don't remember where I saw this, but I remember, I think it was some like Islamic person was, mocking the idea of Jesus being God, and he said, so God had poopy diapers, and I'm like,
exactly what I was going to say. I was like, what, to that person who thinks that there can be no absurdity when it comes to the gospel, Mary had to wipe God's butt. That's not to be sacrilegious. That's to be factual. It's true. We don't see it in the Bible, but we know it had to happen. He was an infant. And so that right there said, I feel like God doesn't take himself as seriously as some people take him. He is very serious. He is very glorious. He is all of these things. But at the same time, God has a sense of humor. Look at, just look at the world around you. There's so many things. You're just kind of like, wait, what? This happens? That's crazy. There's so many things that there's no practical reason why it has to be this way, but it is almost for the soul level of amusement. It's just like, Yeah, God is an amazing being, and our relationships with, our families, our relationships with our spouses, with our friends, with society, yes, they're all shadows of our relationship with God and our spiritual existence, right? And I can tell you this, without laughter, without humor, without whimsy and goofiness, my relationship with my wife would be a miserable slog. And without, just seeing the humor in some of the things God has done with this universe, and, thinking that, God also laughs, my relationship with him would be a grim and terrible slog. Would I still keep up with it? Yeah. Would it be edifying? Would it be as inspiring as it is? No. It would be just nothing but duty and no joy. And I understand that there's a lot of people who feel that way, but I'm just going to go back to my 2-word rebuttal from earlier. They're wrong.
Well, so I hadn't thought of this until we were talking about it and saying, yeah, but this is a huge, I mean, I think it's the big point that Chesterton makes in this poem and in his work generally, saying that God is joyous, and I mean that laughter is a part of our rhesus. The joy is a part of his relationship with us. But now I'm remembering all of the arguments that we had with about this, and saying, laughter is the thing. The problem here is that laughter can make God ridiculous, right? It's like if you think about where we are in the culture war, and a lot of the culture war is comedy at God's expense, right? Comedy at Christianity's expense, for certain, that we are able to make fun of and blaspheme and laugh at Christ constantly. And of course, people do get up. It's like, interestingly, the Pope was just recognizing Serrano, the artist who did the Piss Christ, which I think there's a possibility that is actually an incarnational image and it's not meant to be sacrilegious, but people have disliked it a lot, saying it's like he dumped a crucifix in his own urine. How can that possibly be reverent? You could say, well, God had poopy diapers. The crucifixion is showing God's entry into our physicality and into our disgustingness, and therefore Piss Christ actually is a representation of the reality of how degrading and humiliating the crucifixion was. And yes, that's real. So, there's a lot in this problem of whether or not it's appropriate to imagine a ridiculous animal carrying our Lord. We think it's okay. I mean, we think it's joyous and reverent and showing God's true relationship with us as his children, but not everybody agrees with Chesterton. Well, and then how do we answer them, right? Because the problem is, like, are we going to make, say, Charlie Hebdo, what do you do with Charlie Hebdo covers that are ridiculing the Trinity? In pretty graphic terms, if you've ever seen those. Asses come into it, I'm afraid.
I mean,
yeah.
What we do with it is that we have to go, okay, well, I mean, there have been people on the other side forever. And after a certain point, we're just like, okay, look, we can see the things that God has done and find amusement in them. We can laugh about our misfortunes. We can laugh about laugh about the way God does things in our life. I'm always getting a chuckle out of it that pretty much everything I said I was never going to do, seeing it as beneath me when I was a young man, I've ended up doing, because that's where God has sent me. And so now I make it a point to not ever say, oh, I'm never going to do that. That'll never be something I have to deal with. Just never going to allow it in my life, because I know that the minute I do, God's going to go, hey, cool. You figured out where you're going in a few years. And so
I'm never going to have $1 million.
Oh, there you go.
Never
Let's do those. Yes.
Yeah. No, somehow I try that, and he just kind of looks down and he's like, "Come on, buddy, you know that's not how this works." But like I said, I mean, it depends on how are you laughing. Are you laughing along like, man, is a crazy thing? You know, God has such an interesting way about him, and such, you know, and there's so much beauty, but also sometimes it comes out of these absurd vectors that you're just like, I never thought. Wow, okay, sure, let's do this. Versus, are you trying to laugh? You know, are you laughing in appreciation of what God has done and how He does things, His timing, you know, His just the ripe richness of His hand, or are you laughing in derision to say that, ha ha ha, how foolish, these people are thinking about fairy tales and you know, imputing coincidence with will and blah, 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 blah. You know, this is all stupidity and, you know, just we're better than that, and that's dumb. Like I said, are you laughing in appreciation or derision? And that's kind of where the line breaks.
Yeah, I realized. I just remembered that there's the oldest representation of the crucifixion, as it were, is with the donkey's head, ass's head. Donkeys don't exist at that point. It's a Roman graffiti, right? And it's so and so. I can't remember who's the named character, but he's worshiping his god, and it's a crucified ass. It's interesting that we can't say ass and it be the formal version of the animal, donkey, but that's a silly name. So the animal itself has like done this kind of mutation of nomenclature.
So there's I had on the idea of, you know, humor and, you know, how we relate to God. There's two things I had here. One which is, you know, kind of tangential, not exactly, but, you know, in Philippians chapter 2, Paul says of Jesus, you know, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. He humbled himself. And again, you know, God, you know, deliberately humbled himself, deliberately made himself in some ways, you know, less than he was before, if that makes any sense, or presented himself as less than he was. And how do you humble yourself without, you know, making yourself open to laughter? And then also,
but then laughter's not something joyous; it's something derisive.
I mean, well, I mean, it's you know, kind of like, you know, Nate was saying, you know, if you're married, you know, there's probably no one in the world you have laughed at more than your spouse. And the point you stop laughing at and with them is probably pretty closely aligned to the point where you don't love them. And then, you know, this is not scripture, but this, you know, has some, you know, pretty solid backing as well. You know, there's Thomas More, the devil, that proud spirit, cannot endure to be mocked. Or Martin Luther, the best way to drive out the devil, if he will not yield to this text of scripture, is to jeer and flout at him, for he cannot bear scorn.
Mm-hmm.
And if, you know, the devil is as much as possible, you know, opposite to God, that would imply that God can take a joke.
So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here just to keep this going, because I do agree, right? But the problem being, now I have also unfortunately convinced myself that I don't think the riding the ass was meant to be comedic, right? He's not feet dangling, jester like dangling. It's more, it's the peaceful animal rather than the war horse.
yeah.
so there is a dignity to it, and that Chesterton's poem puts a kind of whimsy and humor and carnival character in it that wasn't there, maybe.
Well,
There are
so
there.
that's what I was saying earlier.
Sorry.
That's what I was saying earlier. When we see
Yeah.
it from the scriptural view, Messiah has come, guys. Here he is. It's not like the life of Brian where he's being all jangly
Right.
and ridiculous.
Exactly. Exactly.
That has got gravity to it. So we see it from the human and the spiritual view. It gets funny when you look at it from the donkey view.
Mm.
And so I think that's where he starts to inject the humor, is that, the donkey's acting like that whole parade was for him, that it was his hour, not realizing that, no, it was just about one of the greatest turning points of human history, because of the man, the divine man that was riding on him. And he doesn't even mention that he was being ridden.
Okay, so there I differ with you in the way I read it. I think he had his hour because God rode him. I think
that's absolutely true.
I think
we
that
don't see the donkey thinking about that.
Yeah, I disagree with your reading of the donkey. That I think he I think he's saying I was there at Palm Sunday, but I was part of that, and that you're reading it as he thinks. I mean, that's an interesting. Maybe it is what Chesterton meant, but that he thinks it's for him, and I just read it as, do you reader recognize who the donkey actually was? So the joke's on us, not the donkey.
I can see where you're coming from.
Okay. So we have been going on this for a little over an hour now. So, Nate, do you have?
I think we've gone to some very good places. This donkey carried us off into the sunset, is what you're saying.
Nate, do you have any last thoughts you want to put in tonight?
There is nothing wrong with being a donkey. Clearly, God makes pretty good use of it. And so, even if you are the ragged outlaw of Earth, or believe you are, even if you believe that your birth and your genesis in this world was as a result of malfeasance and broken nature, it's okay. God's hand is deft in making use of whatever resources are presented to him. So, be a donkey. Carry Christ. We'll make the world better as our own little herd of hee-haws.
It's just too joyous.
And Rachel, how about you? Any last thoughts for tonight?
Well, so I had not. I think what we've accomplished. Thank you all for talking with me, because I was realizing it's like I wanted to talk about this poem, and I didn't realize that why I needed to talk about it was because of this problem of humor and joy, and that Chesterton. I love Chesterton. We were talking about memorizing long poems. I heard a young man a few weeks ago recite all of Lepanto. Which is a good Chestertonian long poem to work on.
I have that one recorded. I could do that one complete. I may still be able to. That one stuck pretty well.
It's got a good martial patter of horse. Well, no, they're on ships, but anyway. So I don't want Chesterton to be wrong about God's joy, and so it was nice getting to wrestle with it a bit here, because I realized the reason I love the poem is because you're in that moment of, and I'm glad to always talk about Tolkien, but we're in that moment of that turn, right? That you think you're in one kind of story, and then there's a turn, and you realize you're in the gospel and in the joy, and that thing that you thought was humble and ridiculous is actually our Savior showing himself.
Okay. Well, thank you both for
You got what's your last thoughts?
I don't think I had considered it that way before, but I definitely agree with Nate in the idea that like we're all a little ridiculous and we're all a little out of shape. We're if you look at your life, if you look at the way if you look at the way you're put together, you look at the way you've made decisions and where they've taken you, um, you're a little you're a little weird. You're a little not quite the right shape. And yet even in that you know in this moment or that you can be the one that uh Jesus rides into other people's lives. And now I feel a little bit like a cheesy Sunday school lesson.
Yeehaw.
But
Yeah, but it's a lesson we're gonna remember. It's a nice one.
okay. So thank you for both joining me tonight, and thank you, Mr. Chesterton, for an excellent poem. And God be with you.
And also with you.
Good night.